You should be all muted. I'm going to probably go through and mute those who aren't. Today we have a guest speaker, Dr. Allison Johnson. She is the pesticide safety coordinator. You might want to jump in and give your actual job title.
Pesticide Safety Education
There
Program Coordinator.
That's the education part. And I am actually, she is in Athens. I'm broadcasting from the North Atlanta Home Show, where we will be all weekend long with Extension answering questions and all that fun stuff. But today we are going to learn about the homeowners aspect of letting people in here, so I apologize, of pesticide safety. And we're going to get all sorts of good stuff from Allison. I love her stuff. It's always bright and colorful, and she's got a really excellent way of getting her point across to everyone. So we'll probably have some time for a Q&A afterwards, but if you have questions that pop up during the course, please put them in the chat box. And if you haven't muted yourself, please go ahead and mute yourself. I will try to catch those who are not muted, but I am going to mute myself so that you all don't have to hear all of the drills and stuff as people put their booths together behind me. But with further ado, I will go ahead and toss this off to Allison, who will give us a really awesome presentation. It's on
Perfect.
you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? I'm so excited. Thank you for the introduction. For those who have just hopped in, I'm just going to do a quick intro while I share my screen. I am traditionally an entomologist, so I have a lot of bugs in my presentations. Very much enjoy bugs for decor. But my name is Dr. Johnson, and I am all about pesticide safety and pesticides for homeowners, for big ag applicators, for organics. I work with any kind of pesticide, and I work with all kinds of people. I've done a few Master Gardener talks. I don't know if you've seen me from there, but I get to do a little bit of everything for everyone. And this is pesticide safety for like homeowners or renters or anyone that's working with general use pesticides. This is something that's really near and dear and close to my heart, because a lot of us don't really think when we're going into the store and we're picking up a bottle of Clorox or we're getting Lysol wipes that those are pesticides too, right? And they have safety aspects that come with them. And so working with pesticide safety, there's a lot of different facets to think about. And so I'm going to kind of go over some of those today, starting with, a holistic kind of view to pest management, whether we're thinking about inside our homes or in our gardens or in schools. Then we're going to kind of dive into some of the nitty gritty of pesticides. And then we're going to really talk about the safety aspects when you're applying them. What do you do when you're done? How can we protect the environment and ourselves when we need to use these chemicals, because they can be really important tools for our gardens and our homes. I mean, we don't want to be in a place that's infested with, cockroaches or bed bugs, right? These are really important. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I have, a lot of parts where if you want to go ahead and put a chat for an answer in the box, I'd love to see your guesses, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So I get a lot of questions. People ask me, why do I care so much about pesticides? That's all I do. People walk in the room and they're like, Allison is pesticides. Why should we care? My grandfather was the reason that I'm in this job. My grandpa was a farmer. He had 500 acres in Michigan. I grew up on that farm when I was little. It was the piece of land that put our family together, really glued our family together. Well, my grandfather sprayed a lot of malathion for sweet corn crops in an enclosed cab system that didn't have appropriate air filtration. My grandpa actually ended up getting really sick, and this was the illness he succumbed to, was a nervous system disorder that was closely related to spraying nervous system affecting insecticides. And so it became something I was really passionate about. And I was like, well, how can I talk to people in our everyday lives? I know we're not spraying malathion, but there are still other things that can really affect us. And so that's why I'm here. Some insecticides last indoors for a really long time. That stuff that you put on the back of your cats and dogs for flea and tick medication? The oils in those insecticides can actually get on walls, stay on walls. They can stay on floors. And how long is that supposed to last? Monthly. So you have an active ingredient with a lifespan of a month or longer, and those oils can get on our fabrics. They can get, on our cabinets and our floors, and we're coming into contact with that without even thinking about it, right? And another thing is that kids are really likely to come into contact with this pesticide residue a lot more than we are, because I know if you have kids or you have grandkids, they are in absolutely everything. My nephew is into this stage where now he's opening cabinets and pulling drawers, right? Anywhere there's pesticide residue, he's likely to come into contact with that. And it's going to affect him more than it's going to affect us because he's much smaller, right? Some formulations affect our indoor air quality. I had a teacher who came to me and confessed she had a cabinet with a can of lavender scented Raid and Febreze. And she sprayed the Raid thinking it was Febreze in the air in this school classroom. And she called me in a panic and she was like, what do? I don't want the kids to come in here, right? So those can be a danger. And then if we have the wrong product, or we even have the right product and we're applying it in the wrong way, we can have a lot of detrimental effects. Say we may apply a product that we're not supposed to put in our garden, and then that soil becomes contaminated, and then that affects the crops you produce. I had a farmer who put down an herbicide in a pasture for horses, and then he went back and read the label and saw that it wasn't on the label and that it was actually toxic to horses. And he asked me, well, what do I do? And I said, well, you're going to have to dig a 2 by 2 foot perimeter and take out each of those weeds you spot treated to make sure that it doesn't affect those horses. And so, we all make mistakes and that's okay. But what we want to do is think about the product and how we can safely use it before we even start, applying or anything, right? And so the first step to successful pest control always is to identify the pest correctly. You don't know how to treat something unless you know what it is. And I have this life cycle of this soybean looper down at the bottom. Each of these are the same pest in different life stages, and each of these have different strategies of how they live. If you have pupal casings, the moths that are in their pupils before they emerge to become adults, is an insecticide going to kill those? No, they are protected from the outside world because they have that hard covering that protects them from insecticide sprays. Granulars aren't going to affect them. It's the same thing if you have pests in the egg stage and, we haven't identified them, they could be protected by the leaves. And, we don't know what caterpillars that we're actually spraying for unless we identify them. So not all of these life stages are going to look the same at all. And so that's why we need to know exactly what we're controlling so we have successful pest control. A few ways I like to do this is always, we have extension agents for a reason. Lisa is a wonderful person. All the extension agents in your county are willing to help. If you don't know something, ask. I have been an entomologist for 13 years, and there are still bugs that I don't know, and weeds are definitely over my head, but there are a lot of really good resources that are free that you can use to help you get close to an identification. Georgia Turf has a really great weed identification page with pictures that you can actually scroll through. And they have the broadleaf weeds and then they have the grass-like ones. So you'd know what, chemical control you might need or whether you could just pull it out of the ground. There is a free app called Seek that you take your phone camera, right? And you go over it at different angles. It can actually get down to species sometimes, and it'll give you a little bit of life history about that pest. That's a free app on your phone. That's run by a group who makes iNaturalist, if anyone's familiar with that. Oops, sorry. I see there's something in the chat. I'm going to keep it up. Are there any known illnesses associated with fleas protection on pests? Well, we can talk about that at the end. We'll touch on that. And then also there are really great field guides. There are field guides to insects from Extension. Bulletin 1409 is a free bulletin you can download. It's got great pictures and information on a whole bunch of common pests in your landscape. And then there are also field guides that you can purchase. There's a lot of different tools that are beyond Google because, When you see something in your garden and you're like, small brown bug on squash, Georgia, and then you get a page and it's everything under the sun, and you've got exotic insects in those images, and you just can't quite find it. These are going to help you kind of narrow it down, right? And it doesn't always work. We may not always identify the right pest. Mistakes happen. Mistakes in pest control happen, and that's okay. You just have to roll with the punches. That's a really big thing in extension. It's something you live by. A lot of failure to control pests can definitely be because we haven't identified it properly, right? So if we haven't identified it and we're applying the wrong product that won't even affect it, or we're applying at the wrong stage, we've missed that window. We're going to have a pest problem. And we can talk about strategies to kind of control if it's gone out of hand. Mistakes in pesticide applications. This is a huge one. So to the right of this slide, I have these two pictures I made by copying and pasting and putting little bugs, but I kind of wanted to show a picture. So I have a leaf here, and the first one is my problem, right? Someone comes to me and they say, wait, I have got aphids, I have got spider mites. But then also, if you look on this leaf, there are predatory mites, there are ladybug larvae, those big black and orange ones that look like alligators. That's actually the immature ladybug. They love aphids. So what happens if I just outright apply a broad spectrum insecticide, without even thinking about it, and maybe I don't use the right product and it doesn't quite work? You can get a secondary infestation. So say I applied something that's going to knock out a whole bunch of aphids, then I'm going to come back in and I'm going to lose all my beneficials, and then I'm going to have another pest problem, right? So that's something to think about. If we're applying things incorrectly, we can really bring a problem for a secondary infestation for us. So it's just something to keep in mind. Mistakes happen, but we want to be really cautious with what we're actually applying or how we're managing pests. And so this is a really good example I like for why identification is important. Does anyone know, or anyone have an inkling or idea what this Facebook post is? This is from a gardening group. This is from Georgia Backyard Gardeners. They said, what are they and how do I get rid of them? And it's this picture of red soil clay. Yeah, someone said fire ants and compost. We've got, little fire ants. Aha, Susan. So someone gave recommendations right off the bat, right? Someone said, put fire ant killer. Put Spectricide One Shot. It's the most convenient and works as well as all the products I've tried. It's just easier. Sprinkle and walk away. No water needed. Just watch your yard for smaller mounds. These are not fire ants. These are solitary bees that don't sting, and they're actually really beneficial in our yard. And so, if this person were to just look at these original first Facebook comments and then go and put a broad spectrum insecticide like Spectricide in their yard, they've decimated an entire population of native bees without even knowing it, right? So it's really important to identify your pest. You could take something like this picture, bring it to an agent. It doesn't have to be the actual pest. These kind of holes would be a really good determinant of what it is. Yeah, good job, Susan. They are native bees. And we don't have to use pesticides for everything, right? My job is pesticides, but one of my favorite parts of my job is everything, including pesticides. There's so much more than just using chemicals. There are kind of three major groups that are going to determine, one, if we're going to have pests and how bad they're going to be. I'm going to rant about El Nino for a little bit. Two, there are non-chemical pest management practices that are really beneficial for your garden. We're going to talk about a few of those. And then we're going to get into all of the pesticides. So nature changes our pest populations. That's right? We are having the most wild January. It was 18 degrees last week, and today it's 65 and thunderstorming. It's been just 4 days between those two. That also affects our pest populations. And so I have an agent who will come to me. He'll slump down in his chair. He'll just go, El Nino. I can't stand it. That is because the current weather conditions El Nino we're having right now creates a really warm and wet season, right? What does warm and wet equal? Bugs, pests, mosquitoes. You can expect that the mosquito season is going to start in March and it's going to go all the way into October for Georgia. Weather affects how much and how many pests we're going to get. A couple years ago, we had that really hard frost. I think just last year, it took out all of my landscape plants, but what else did it take out? Took out all the little azalea lace bugs. I had a much better pest population when they were coming in. So weather is a really big determinant of what kind of pest problems we're going to have. It also determines, what's going to get to us. Different storms can bring in different pests. Hurricanes can bring in mosquitoes. We can have natural barriers like lakes or rivers or mountains that kind of limit where pests are going to be. And then nature also determines what kind of shelter, what kind of food, what kind of water. So that's something to think about. It can either be our friend or our foe. It's just something to keep in mind. We're going to have a really wet, rainy season this year. We can expect that we're going to have a heavy pest year. So think about that when you're going into your planting times, right? If you're doing a garden or, you're trying to do cut flowers, think about we're going to have a heavy pest population. For your home, there's going to be a lot of mosquitoes. So maybe get yourself some mosquito repellent or some long sleeve shirts and just be anticipating those changes. For non-chemical ways to reduce pests, these are my favorite because there's so many different pieces that you can do to either prevent or manage pests if you actually get them. There's kind of three major groups. The first is what they call that cultural control. I just really think of this as smart production practices, right? So this is, being appropriate with how much you're pruning. We're not putting everything that we want to grow into one container and getting all of those plants into one place. What happens when there's no air circulating between pests? You get fungal pathogens, you get fungus, you get disease, you get blights, you get rots. This can also be not over fertilizing. If we over fertilize, we may cause damage to our really sensitive plants. You can definitely affect tomato production, over fertilizing. And then also the timing of planting. Something I think really cool in Georgia, Three Porch Farm in Comer, they actually plant their dahlias at least a month or maybe 2 months later than everywhere else produces dahlias because they're trying to miss a really big pest window. And so because Georgia is so warm, they can keep those dahlias going for a little bit later. And it's also a unique thing they bring to their business because they have dahlias when other places don't. But that's just one thing that they're doing to help prevent pests. Another thing is the mechanical control. So something in the bottom left hand of this screen that I think is really cool. If you want to grow a blemish-free tomato that doesn't have any damage from piercing, sucking pests or any biting damage or tomato hornworms, I detest when one of those is in my garden because I think I'll have the most beautiful tomato and then I'll turn it on the backside and it's just been eaten through like a hungry caterpillar. These are little bags called organza mesh bags, like you would get your jewelry, like earrings in. And after that fruit has set, you can actually put an excluding device like one of these bags over the tomatoes and prevent pests from actually eating them. And that's an easy thing you can do to keep your garden, damage free from pests in that situation. You could also think about trap crops. Dill is a really good trap crop to plant in between tomatoes. It attracts beneficial pests, which we're going to talk about on the just next slide. And it brings in predators. And so you're going to have that population of natural control that's going to come in to help protect your tomatoes. And then everyone's favorite, deer. We cannot get away with gardening or having a really good vegetable garden without having some sort of mechanical control for all of those deer, right? Deer are pests. They're actually pesticides for deer. They're mostly repellents. But we can also mechanically control these with different types of excluding devices. Same for birds or squirrels. I'm currently fighting the squirrels in my yard. Mechanical control is a great thing for that. And then sanitation. How many of y'all have gone through your garden, got your pruning shears, you're pruning, you're not even thinking about it from plant to plant to plant, picking off those diseased branches? What happens when we're picking off diseased branches and then we're going to prune nice undiseased plants. We're spreading that. Yep, we're spreading that disease to the garden. We see this a lot with people who have boxwoods and boxwood blight. And they'll be trying to get rid of that boxwood blight, and then they'll go to the next thing, and guess what? They're just spreading that boxwood blight. So something I do is I have a little spray bottle, and it's got, alcohol in it, like 100% alcohol. Whether that's you get it from the lab or you get really strong, cheap vodka, and I spray my pruners, wipe them on my pants. They're sanitized. I'm going to the next thing. That's something easy. I've got a little place for my pruning shears. I've got that spray, and I'm just spraying off my equipment before I move to the next thing. That's going to prevent a lot of disease spreading in your garden, having those kind of sanitary practices. Also something to think about if you're sharing seeds or you're in any seed swap groups, you want to make sure you're getting a reliable source for that seed. Some diseases can hitch on the outer shells of those seeds. A lot of the times, tomatoes can bring in a lot of disease on the outer coat of their seeds if they haven't been fermented and then properly cleaned. So it's something to think about. These are all ways that we can control pests without having to use pesticides. My favorite are natural enemies. We bring these in and we keep them when we don't use broad spectrum insecticides for control, right? So most of the time, the insecticides we have for control are kind of those overall sweeping. You look at the label and it says kills ants, wasps, cockroaches, spiders, the list goes on and on and on. Those broad spectrum insecticides can also affect our natural enemies. We've got a lot of free pest control. This is just some. So there are parasitoid wasps that actually lay their eggs on the tomato hornworms, and then those eggs develop and then come up on the outside and actually destroy that pest. We've got tons of generalist predators that eat aphids. They're attracted to the sugary substance the aphids release, and then they also love to eat the aphids. We've got ground beetles, we've got lady beetles, we've got pirate bugs, we've got lacewings. These are all really sensitive to broad spectrum insecticides. My favorite, I always get questions of, what can I do to control Japanese beetles, right? They're the worst. Decimate my dad's peach tree every year. There are actually products you can buy with beneficial nematodes to put into the soil. We've got naturally occurring bacillus in our soil that some people sell called milky spore that can actually affect the reproduction of Japanese beetles, not the reproduction, but the development. And, they actually won't survive. And we've already got that in our soil. So making sure we have a really healthy soil profile. And my favorite is there's a lot of research into these parasitoid flies that lay their eggs on Japanese beetles. And people actually doing research to commercially produce these flies and potentially release them to reduce Japanese beetle populations. So there's so many different things that we can use, but something that we may not always think about, and traditionally, our parents may have thought this way. I know a lot of folks still think this way. You think if there's a problem, there's some sort of magic spray solution, right? That's what pesticides have kind of been advertised to us. They're really easy. There are disadvantages with those non-chemical practices. They take a lot of time. They take your effort. They take you having to go out every day and look and see what's going on. So chemical, while they are an easy solution, they really need to be your last choice. A pesticide can be anything. There are pesticides for mammals, there are for weeds, there are for mites, there are for diseases, for bugs, nematodes, anything you can think of. The cleaning solutions we bring in our home to kill bacteria are pesticides, and they're regulated by the EPA. All pesticides are regulated or registered because if they work to kill something, they can also harm us or non-target plants or animals or the environment. And we regulate them to make sure that, one, if you're using something that's a restricted use pesticide, you need to have the education to be able to apply that. And then two, we're trying to reduce unnecessary harm to the communities around us. And so there are really two main classifications. There's those restricted use pesticides that I talked about, and then there are the unclassified or general use. Now, restricted use You got to go through me for education, for licensure, the Department of Ag. There is someone watching your application records to see what you're applying. This is strong stuff. They can cause serious effects. And we'll talk about the signal words for some restricted use pesticides. Unclassified or general use, you may think, well, they're not restricted, so they're fine, you know? Some people say you can drink Roundup and you'll be okay. These can still pose a risk if they're applied improperly. And so, you know, general use pesticides, we think, you know, we've got our Ortho Home Defense, you know, we're thinking, you know, maybe these are a little bit safer. Also, your organic pesticides, they may not always be the safer option. You know, neem oil, if anyone uses neem oil in their garden, it's a great organic pesticide option. But the oils can actually be really irritating to your skin and eyes if you're not wearing gloves when you're applying that product. And since it is a registered pesticide, it's going to have a label on what safety you need to be wearing. Azadirachtin, which is neem oil, is also really toxic to aquatic invertebrates, just like herbicides are. So it's just something to keep in mind. Even though it's general use, it may not always be the safest option. Now, minimum risk pesticides. I get a lot of questions about these. These are your Facebook recipes. These are your essential oils. There are a whole bunch of pesticides that are exempt from this EPA regulation. There's about 40 different ingredients. This is like different oils, different acids, garlic, rosemary oil, mint oil. And these can be efficacious in controlling pests. And, you know, they're not registered because they have a very low risk to humans, right? But if they're not applied properly, they can still cause damage. Mint oil can be really toxic and irritating to your eyes. If you're applying that and say you touch a plant and then you bring it to your face, you know, peppermint in your eyes does not feel good. But they're also really efficacious. If you've got like a fungal pathogen like black spot on your rose, sesame, clove, and rosemary oil is really good to control this, right? One thing I want to warn you about minimum risk pesticides is since they are exempt from EPA regulation, there's no agency making sure what they've got in the bottle is what they say they've got. So if you are getting, you know, this mint pesticide from Amazon, or, you know, you're getting this one insecticide from Facebook, do a lot of research into the company. Make sure they're a reliable company and make sure that you can trust what you're getting, because a lot of groups will just put some stuff in a bottle and put it on for sale on Amazon, and then you can purchase it and it may not even be an effective product. And then you've lost all hope on using that group because you've used the one thing and it doesn't work, right? So beware of marketing scams, beware of trade names, really look for that active ingredient in that bottle. And so I want to talk about the top most commonly used registered pesticides. And I have a whole bunch of pictures because you're saying, Allison, why are you showing me these names like pendimethalin and 2,4-D and glyphosate and carbaryl? These are all their given names. It's what I talk in my job. But most of these are herbicides. And so what are the potential risks if they're applied improperly or they move off target? Y'all can put some in the chat box. I've got a couple of the most common risks that are, if these are applied improperly. So say you put down a granular herbicide and then it rains. You put down a weed and feed and then we get these 3 inches of rain we just got in the past hour and they run off target. If anyone wants to guess. People don't usually think herbicides are going to cause the most damage, right? We're just like, they're weed killers. They're going to kill the weeds. Water pollution, yes. Runoff into waterways, yes. Y'all are spot on. Herbicides on flowering plants can actually confuse pollinators and sometimes kill them. So that's why there's a lot of bee labels on herbicides now, because if you spray it on clover, it's a weed in my yard. What's the problem? Bees love clover, causes them to become very confused and disoriented and can lead to their death. Algae bloom in water, that's a really big fertilizer one. Herbicides are highly toxic to aquatic organisms. Fish, frogs, any sort of salamander that are really sensitive to water quality, herbicides are highly toxic. So they actually can lead to a lot of fish kills. They can lead to the decline of frogs. They can lead to effects of reproductive systems in frogs, which is eventually going to lead to their ultimate decline. So having it get in waterways is a huge thing. And then something that people may not always think about, say you've got someone that's applying herbicides in an ornamental area and they're spraying down around the roots of big trees. Trees are plants. These herbicides, especially these broad spectrum herbicides, can actually harm, injure, or kill trees in the long run. If you've got your lawn sprayed, you get those lawn clippings cut and then you put them around the base of your tree like mulch. They're actually carrying herbicide residue and can kill those roots in the bottom of that tree. And then you've got a dead tree in your yard, which is a hazard for your house, right? Especially with this crazy weather we've been having. So there are some inherent risks, especially with herbicides. And then we've got our big, common insecticides that we're going to talk about the risks of those as well. Some similar favorites. We've seen these. These are what we get at Lowe's, Home Depot, Tractor Supply. These are made of all of those common ingredients that we talked about. I just wanted you to see their brand name versus the name that I spoke about earlier. So let's talk about buying pesticides online. Why do we not want to do it? It's because a lot of people online sell restricted use pesticides, but they do not advertise them as so. And so there's always a risk if you're buying a pesticide. So, there's that website called Do My Own Pest Control. All of those pesticides on that website are restricted use, and you're supposed to have a license to apply those. I had a lady who called me and said she bought a product online to control ants around her honeybee hives, and she was telling me the product. And I said, well, ma'am, that's a restricted use pesticide. That can actually cause a lot of damage. And she goes, well, I just bought it online and I didn't know. We had her bring it in and we took care of it, but you want to be really careful what you purchase. Some things are general use, that really strong atrazine, that's general use, but just be careful what you're buying online. They're not going to tell you if it's restricted because they want to make that quick buck, right? They're not going to tell you that it's a restricted use pesticide. And so now we're going to get into the nitty gritty of pesticide safety. This is what our next half hour is going to be. First, we're going to kind of break down that label. I get asked a lot if I've ever read an entire pesticide label, and I don't think I'd read a full one until I actually got in this job position, because it's like 30 pages long, right? The stuff you buy from Home Depot, yeah, it's got the little pull tab pamphlet, but you go online and look at the labeling, which is the label plus all that information. Yes, the print is tiny. My dad hates reading labels because he needs readers now. And so he'll usually just give me the product and he'll be like, tell me what I need to mix, right? He doesn't like reading those labels. And I'm like, well, there's more than just what you need to mix. But the labeling plus the label, all that information, each piece is really important, but they make it really tiny and really confusing because I just don't think they want to pay the money for that paper, right? They don't want to bring that packet of paper with that bottle. But that label is a legally binding agreement. So when you purchase that pesticide, you are legally agreeing that you are going to follow the instructions on this label. And that's where it gets you, because who wants to read that, right? But there are some things that we can get away with glancing over, but there are some things that we want to pay attention to immediately, and we're going to go into those. First is the name. So why do I have this just 1,1-dimethyl 4,4-bipyridinium dichloride? Blech. Who communicates in that? That is the chemical name or the active ingredient of the pesticide. Fun fact, most pesticides are like 20 active ingredients. That's all we have really left. It takes 20 years and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to register a pesticide, a new active ingredient. And so most of the time, they're just taking active ingredients, mixing them together, and then selling a new product, right? So these chemical names, which I communicate in the common name, we're going to talk about why that's important. So this 1,1-dimethyl 4,4-bipyridinium dichloride is paraquat dichloride, right? That is what the folks who are in my position communicate in. And then they have a trade or a brand name, which is what you think most people would recommend to you, right? Spectracide One Shot, Gramoxone, Hot Shot, Raid. That's that kind of trade name, but we need to be wary of that trade name. So these are all known as 7. Are these all the same pesticides? Someone say yes, no, maybe. These are all known as 7. So say someone calls me up and they want a recommendation and I tell them 7 and they go out and they buy something that has 7 on the label. No, these are all different pesticides. The middle one is a restricted use pesticide, which affects your nervous system. The one to the right are 2 different pesticides mixed together, and then the original 7 is a pyrethroid all on its own. And so if we're communicating in these common names, and we've got, this is to do with master gardeners, if we're giving homeowners recommendations, we're not using trade names. We're using the common name, right? Because we want to recommend that specific chemical, because we could have someone very well that could go and buy 7 this restricted use carbaryl pesticide and cause a lot of damage to themselves, and we didn't even think about it. So when you're communicating pesticide recommendations, we're always using the common name and not the trade name, no matter how bad Garden Tech wants us to say 7 over and over and over again. These are 7 across different companies. One is from Bayer. So it's just something to think about. This is really important. Most of the pesticides you're going to deal with are going to be warning or caution, right? So warning means if you get it on your hands, you have about 30 minutes to an hour to wash that off without causing any serious damage, right? You've got about 30 minutes. You really want to do it as soon as possible. But say you're in the garden, you're spraying something, you get it on your jeans. Okay, you probably want to go inside soon, take those jeans off, put them in the wash by themselves, and then go hop in the shower. Warning means it could do harm if left on your skin for a long time or if inhaled, but it's not going to kill you. Caution, you've got a couple hours, right? You're working outside all day. You don't want to come back inside. Caution, you can take a lot more of that on your skin, around your face. It could still cause damage, which is why they say caution. But it's just something to think about, these 2. Now, danger and danger poison. These are the restricted use pesticides. Less than a teaspoon of that pesticide, whether inhaled or ingested of a danger poison product, can kill you in less than an hour. They have a lot of closed systems for these restricted use pesticides because why do they say keep out of the reach of children? Kids could get into access of this. And then just the smallest amount to a kid is going to cause death, right? And so those restricted use pesticides, we really need to be cautious about those danger poison and danger labels. So say you buy something online, it didn't say it was a restricted use pesticide when you bought it, and then you get it, and then at the very top it says restricted use and then it says danger. We don't want to use those products. We want to give them back unless we have a license and we know how to use them. We would want to return that product. Warning, caution, it all depends on how long you're exposed and how toxic that product is. So something to keep in mind with those warning and caution products. PPE requirements. How many people wear gloves when they're applying pesticides? I do. I wear rubber gloves. What's really nice nowadays is that you can get disposable gloves pretty much anywhere. Those nitrile laboratory gloves, I love those for pesticide applications or any sort of work because you can take those off and throw them away, right? We don't have to wash those rubber gloves and then dry them out. Any pesticide, whether it is a bottle of Clorox wipes or Roundup or a weed and feed, is going to have PPE requirements. You're supposed to wear gloves when you apply Clorox wipes on a table when you use those, because that is a bactericide that's leaching into your skin, and your body is going to have to process that. Your kidneys are going to have to work hard to process that. I've never once before I took this job used a pair of gloves when I'm using Clorox wipes, right? You don't think about it, but it is a pesticide, and exposure a long time can have serious issues. And so there's this little part on the label that's usually going to be on there, and you can see if there's any sort of extra PPE you might wear. But the stuff you always want to think about is long pants, long shirt, gloves, and then you want some sort of waterproof shoe. I really like those like $14, $15 rubber boots from Walmart because they're easy. They're my garden boots. They live outside and I always shake them out to make sure that there's no bugs in them. When I'm done applying pesticides, take a water hose, spray off my boots outside, leave them next to the door. I have not brought pesticides into my house, right? Something really easy. The more you're exposed to pesticides for the longer amount of time, the greater risk you're going to have. This is the pesticide risk formula that people in my job use. So say you're using a real toxic pesticide and you're exposed for just a second or two. This is a big thing why I have gramoxone in those earlier slides. It's used in peach production and it is a huge respiratory hazard. So say you go out into a field and your respirator doesn't work quite well. Less than a minute of that, you're going to pass out. Someone's going to have to pull you from the field and you're going to need medical attention. Okay, I can see where that's a risk. What about if I'm applying Roundup every week for 20 years? I'm not wearing gloves. That could be just as harmful in the long run, right? You know, some sort of product that has an innate risk and I'm using for a long time in the long run can have a risk of pesticide exposure. You can always wear more PPE than is required. You know, you can wear a particle mask, you can wear glasses, you can wear sunglasses when you're out in the sun and you're applying pesticides. Those glasses are protecting your eyes. You can wear a hat to protect your head from the sun and from sprays. You can always wear more. There are really 4 major ways you're exposed to pesticides, but I want to focus on the skin because, you know, a lot of the times I have folks who tell me, you know, they're not thinking about gloves, you know, they're putting out some sort of product and they're not getting it on their hands. Well, there's always little droplets. They're going to come back and bounce on your skin. The most harmful kind of pesticide is one that's going to be milky or oily. A lot of the times these are called emulsifiable concentrates. So, you know, we get a lot of chemicals that are clear in clear solutions. When you spray them, they spray like water. But then we have like neem oil, or we have different oils, or we've got kind of milky looking pesticides. Those are going to sink into our skin, just like body lotion. And they're going to be really hard to wash off and they're going to sink in really fast. So that's one of the biggest ways you're exposed to pesticides, and that can be a serious issue. You can always breathe or get it in your eyes. But the best way to reduce exposure to ingesting or on your skin is to just wash your hands after a pesticide application. Really easy. I'm keeping track of my time. Now, here's where I want to talk about those common insecticides that we saw on that slide way when I talked about herbicides and those 3 major insecticides. 2 of those insecticides were carbamate and organophosphate insecticides. If anyone wants to take a funny guess at how pesticides or insecticides came to be into this world, these organophosphate and carbamate insecticides were actually a derivative of mustard gas from war. And so they affect the nervous system of insects. Well, as much as you don't want to hear it, we have really similar nervous systems to bugs. And so what affects the nervous system of a bug actually affects us in the same way in much smaller doses. And so 7-Dust, Carbaryl, malathion, any of those, you know, broad spectrum insecticides can cause confusion, memory loss, can cause you to forget an hour or 2 of your time, can also cause really bad neurodegenerative diseases in the long run, like Parkinson's, right? And this doesn't happen immediately because our body is processing it. It's going in and it's affecting the receptors in our brain, and it's causing things to shut off and turn on, and it's causing issues. For the insect, they're dead. For us, it can cause some long-term issues. So say we've got 7-Dust and we apply it like, you know, candy in a garden, like my grandmother used to do, and she's not wearing a mask. She's breathing all of that product in, and it can have delayed effects over time. So you want to be really careful for using anything that's an organophosphate or a carbamate. And how do you figure out what that is? ask your extension agent, I've got this product, can you tell me what it is? Or you can do a Google of that common name. So you can Google carbaryl, or you can Google, acephate, and it'll tell you what kind of class it is, right? And so then you know what kind of caution you need to be using. An easy way to reduce pesticide exposure is with gloves. I keep impressing on this, but I keep giving talks to people that tell me they're not wearing gloves when they're applying pesticides. And I'm like, what's going on, y'all? It's really easy. You can get dishwashing gloves, and you can just take them and wash them outside with Dawn dish soap and water after you're done doing an insecticide application. Take them off, let them dry. You can use them again. As long as they're not cracked and brittle, you can use them several times. You can get those nitrile gloves, which are really easy to take off, but we don't want to use fabric or leather gloves. Why? Because that's like wearing a mitt that's going to absorb and go straight into your skin the entire time you're outside. Leather gloves are just skin on skin, and it's going to sink in. And so we always want to use some sort of rubber or, butyl or nitrile kind of repellent material. Eyes and lungs. You could, I'm sure we've got masks laying around in our junk drawers. I found one in my drawer the other day, and, people are still wearing masks. They're still popular. Those particle masks are really good if you're doing some sort of, dust or particle spray, or you're going outside and you just don't want to breathe anything in. They're great. They're also, more extreme measures you can take, like respirators, and you can use those even if the label doesn't require it. You just want to keep up with that care. But particle masks are really easy and accessible to have nowadays. I recommend if you're doing some sort of weed and feed or fertilizer or any sort of bag granular that you're putting out and spreading, you might wear a particle mask, because there's that dust at the bottom of the bag, right? That's on the outside of that product too, and it's being released into the air when you're spinning it. When you have grass seed, that dye on that grass seed as you're sprinkling it around can also be an irritant. It doesn't have to be a pesticide to cause issues with your lungs. And so now we're talking about the application. Before you apply any pesticides, I don't care if it's a herbicide, if it's a weed and feed, if it's an insecticide spray, you want to make sure anything you don't want to touch a pesticide is not there. So a lot of the things you may not think about, your dog's water bowl that's outside, kids' toys, garden tools that you don't want exposure to. If everything is in the same area and you're applying pesticides to it, it's going to have that residue too. And then after you've taken your gloves out and you're moving everything everywhere, you're touching your door handle, you're touching the sink. And every time you come back in, you're going to re-expose yourself to pesticides. So make sure you're taking off any of that stuff that doesn't need exposure. And then you're mowing your blooms. So this is for a lot of folks that deal with lawns that are of decorative variety with dandelions and clover and some weeds. And, we might want to do some sort of pre-emergent herbicide. Make sure there's nothing flowering, because bees love dandelions, clover, anything we think is a weed is a resource to a flying insect. And so herbicides and even insecticides definitely are going to cause issues with those organisms. And then always think about the weather before you're applying a pesticide. If it's really windy, you might not want to apply it because it's going to drift off target. This is a big issue in ag commodity production. If they do a big pesticide application in strong wind, those little droplets are going to move off target into your neighbor's yard, your neighbor's crops. That causes crop loss if they're using an herbicide, and then it goes and kills all of Dan's tomatoes down the street. Always just feel the air around you before you go and you do a pesticide application. Farmers have to log the wind speed before they do an application sometimes with some products. Those weather stations are not going to suffice for those on-ground conditions, because it's different. Weather stations are at airports and they're really high in the air for airplanes, because they need to know that for their altimeters. For us, assess the on-site conditions. And then always, if it's going to rain, it's better not to spray. There are rain fast products, and we'll talk about that as I speed up in my last 10 minutes. But it's always better to not, because I just had 3 inches of rain, which just took out all of my mulch and everything else I had and sent it all down to the bottom of my yard just this morning, right? And so we never know how bad the rain could actually be. You know, it could be a nice light soaking, or it could be this torrential downpour we just had. During the application, this is just paying attention to what you're doing. If you have those like little ant bait stations, make sure that you're using the glue that's provided, or you use little sticky dots if you have them, or a rock on top of that to make sure it's not going anywhere. Because wildlife or dogs or kids, if you're doing them inside, are going to take those bait stations. It's got strong insecticide in there. And then always check your equipment just to make sure nothing is leaking. While you're doing that, it's just being mindful of what you're doing while you're doing it. There's my dead bee. So let's not do that. And then after the application, if you're using something that you bought from the store and it's got a spray nozzle attached, that's nice. Just make sure it's clean and you've put it away when you're done. If you're using a spray tank, you know, my dad mixes a lot of stuff in hand pump sprayers. You can rinse it out with water. So you can put some water in it and get that, you know, diluted. Then you can go back and spray it on that site. And that's okay because you've already sprayed the pesticide, right? Spraying a diluted version is going to be okay. You could use it later to mix other pesticides if you know they work well together. But if you're cleaning the inside of that tank out with Dawn dish soap or any sort of strong surfactant, don't reuse that rinse water in another application. We'll talk about where we clean stuff in just a second. And then always store the stuff properly, and I'm going to touch on that later as well. Like I said, washing gloves with soap and water is a really important thing if you're using reusable gloves. Washing off your rain boots or your rubber boots when you're doing an application. We don't want to wipe our hands on anything after we're done, right? Because if we're wiping it on our jeans, then, you know, we're just putting the pesticide on ourselves. And then also, if you've done an application and you know you've got stuff on your pants, go ahead and wash your clothing separately from everyone else's clothing, just to make sure that you're not contaminating or potentially contaminating other people's clothes. And so I'm going to kind of run through these because I got excited and I talked a lot in the beginning about IPM. These next two slides are going to be my part of the lecture where I say just because you can doesn't mean you should. You know, you're going to get a bottle and you're going to see, okay, well, what can this control? And it's got a long list, you know, it's one of those, you know, broad spectrum, and it's got controls everything, or controls, you know, flying insects on tomatoes, or, you know, controls anything in and around a home. There's going to be a long list, but usually they're not the full list. And so if you see on that bottle a phrase not limited to, unless it's specifically prohibited, and it'll have a list, you can use that pesticide against a pest in your garden as long as the site's okay. So you always check, but you know, there'll be a lot of products that's okay for gardens, and it controls some of these things. But if you've got something and it's not directly specifically prohibited, you can use that product. Why am I saying this? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I don't know if my video will work. I don't think it's going to work today. Sorry, I tested my videos earlier and they didn't work, but I'm going to explain the situation. So I had a grower send me this video, and he was showing off his new rig he set up. He had an Ace Hardware sprayer pumped up to full max pressure. He had it strapped along his side. Then he had himself a gas-powered leaf blower with his hose going to a piece of PVC pipe, and then he had that hose duct taped to his leaf blower, and he was spraying on his apple trees. And he told me, how great is this? And when I first got this, I said, this cannot be legal. I was like, this cannot be a legal thing. I sent it to one of my friends and I was like, can they do this? Can he do this? And he sent right back, yes, he can. It's not restricted, prohibited. It's not specifically prohibited on the label. It's legal. Is it safe? No. And he asked me, is it getting good coverage? And I said, no, you're blowing most of the stuff over the tree. You're not reaching into the canopy, right? He was trying to make a homemade air blast sprayer, and they've got kits that you can actually buy online to do this. But you want to think about where that product needs to go, and he needed it to go into the tree canopy. And so the way he was applying this pesticide wasn't necessarily the best. You know, he took pieces of paper and put it into the canopy to see if that spray coverage was reaching in there, and it wasn't. It was just going over the top. Not to mention, this man didn't have on gloves and had all of this pesticide blowing right back in his face with the wind. And so I'm sorry my video didn't show, because I think it's just funny, but you can see that spray is just kind of going over the tree canopy. So you always want to think about what you need to control and where you want it before you even buy a product. You need to think about specifically, I'm controlling this pest in this area, and then think about the way you're going to apply it. And then storage and disposal. So this is usually found at the end of a label, and it'll have some specific instructions. So say for some examples, Roundup or glyphosate does not do well if it's mixed in a metal tank. So a lot of the times that's why it's in a plastic bottle. Some herbicides and fertilizers stored together can actually become flammable. And so there'll be specific instructions to let you know if there's any kind of risk like that. But the main thing to think about is we want to keep it away from kids. So my mom had this, the catch-all under the sink cabinet that had cleaners and Raid and any sort of like Clorox, and it had everything for cleaning plus pesticides, and it was just right under the sink, and you could open it and grab whatever you wanted. Well, kids can too. And so, this may not be the best storage solution if you've got little kids running around the home, or say, for example, you're that teacher who had that lavender Raid and that Febreze right next to each other in those purple cans. It's easy to pick something up. And so the best option for storage is going to be to put it in a cabinet with childproof locks, or a mudroom that doesn't get a lot of traffic, or a cabinet in the garage, somewhere where people aren't every day, or people who could be exposed to these aren't every day. My favorite is, if you have a cabinet in your mudroom that's above, or close, or somewhere in the corner, put them in there. Garage is also perfect. Shed outside, great. Just be careful of the temperatures, right? And then disposing of pesticides. It's better to properly dispose of pesticides rather than keeping them forever. Pesticides don't have expiration dates put on the label for a reason, because one, they want you to keep them, and they want you to know that they're efficacious for a long time. A lot of them are efficacious for a really long time, so they'll work as long as they can still be sprayed. And if you notice a pesticide is chunky, or it's not spraying well, or it's not getting as good a control, it may be expired. But I have a lot of folks that call me and they're like, I just bought this house and there's a barrel of pesticide in the basement, right? And that's a hazard to deal with. That's a public health hazard, because a lot of those are really hot pesticides. So really only buy what you need and mix what you need when you need it. You never want to pour pesticides down the drain. Antifreeze down the drain, nope, don't do it. And there are some options that they'll tell you how to dispose of them. But say you've got something you want to get rid of, you just don't even want the product anymore at all. There'll be pesticide disposal days that are done through your municipal government, usually on like a quarterly or biannual basis. You can call your county government office, or you can also call your agents, and they can, reach out to me, and we can help find one of those disposal events so that you don't have to put this in the household trash. Some are allowed to be put in the household trash, but it's better to take it to one of these disposal events so that we can properly take care of it for you, right? Then it's a burden off your back. The label may have specific disposal instructions. And so if it says on that label, remember, it's a legally binding agreement. So what I say doesn't matter. Those instructions take precedence. Don't put liquid pesticides in the trash. So a lot of the times, trash will be compressed or compacted. If you've got a liquid in the trash and it's compacted and that container busts, that pesticide is going to run off, and it's going to run off site. And that's just a hazard site. So you can either wait for one of those hazardous disposal events. I think I've got a calendar on my website that I'll share with Lisa that has some of those events listed, or you can absorb that material with kitty litter and then put it in the household trash. Those are two options. You just never want to have liquid in the trash. Also, never use a pesticide container for anything but pesticides. You want to rinse and puncture that container if it's empty, because you don't want anyone else to use it mistakenly, because that's a risk, because there's still residue in the bottle. Okay, I have 2 more slides and I'm at 1, so I'm going to go quick. One, for water quality, the main thing I wanted to get my point across was you want to use products that have lower solubility. So say maybe an oil versus a water-based pesticide if you're in an area that is really prone to runoff. So say you're, going for something at the edge of your yard bed, maybe you have like a creek or a stream nearby, or you're at the end of your yard and there's, storm drains right into runoff. You may think about buying a product that has a lower solubility. There are also products labeled as rain fast. So, Roundup has a rain fast product, and that has a agent in it that actually keeps the product on the plant. So like a sticking agent, an adjuvant, and that's better than just having a water-based product. So look for terms like rain fast or oil-based or emulsifiable if you're in anywhere that's a sensitive site that you don't want to use just that water-based. Why? Because some herbicides are really soluble, and atrazine is found in almost every municipal water system in the United States because it's a really small molecule. It's an herbicide, and it's used frequently. And so people use just atrazine to produce a lot of corn in the Midwest United States. And the numbers in parts per million are a lot higher in the Midwest than here because we're not using it for that corn production, right? But it's almost in every water system. And it's really hard to filter out because it's a very small molecule. I finished on time. And so if anyone has any questions, I would love to answer them. My email here, ajohns14ug.edu, or you can send them to Lisa and she'll send them to me. I'm sure she'd be interested in what y'all are curious about. It's just, something to be mindful about. When we're using these pesticides, I didn't even think about these things half the time when my dad had them in the garage, right? Not until I actually started looking into the public health and safety of them.
That was awesome, Allison. Thank you so much. Hopefully everybody learned a lot of really good stuff today, and you were watching your time. You're like way better than me with respect to that.
I had the phone.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, so we've got a few questions in the chat box. Let me pull those up.
Oh yeah, the known illnesses with the flea protection on pets. I remember that one.
All right, let me scroll up here. Yeah. So are there known illnesses, human and animal, associated with flea protection on pets?
So there's not a lot of documentation. There is a lot of personal documentation. So there's a lot of people who like post on blog posts or will give their personal statements about how they feel after they've applied those insecticides in their home. And a lot of people report feeling sluggish or having confusion or, not feeling great. But there's no linked studies to the residues found in homes and that effect. But it's something to be mindful of. Those products are meant to last a long time. A lot of people who are stretching their dollar do it like every 3 months instead of every 1 month. And it's still an efficacious product for those 3 months. And those oils are really residue and sticky on your walls. Washing your walls, I didn't know was kind of a common thing, and it's something you can do to help reduce some of that residue, or wiping down your cabinets if you have dogs that are getting that treatment. Also, the bandana on your dog's neck after you do the flea ticker heartworm is a great way to reduce a lot of that. But remember, it's a lipophilic insecticide, so it travels through the hair and through the fat, and so it'll kind of spread a little bit, but it's a great way to keep it localized.
Awesome. Okay. And then another one, fire ants in compost.
I was having them guess a picture. I had solitary bees and I wanted someone to guess what it was.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, so somebody got the look. water pollution of local streams, runoff into waterways, probably asked another question there.
Yep.
Algae bloom in water.
So that was our herbicide risk
Okay.
portion.
Okay.
I love
And then
those questions.
lots of, thank you so much. This was awesome, 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 which you're always awesome. Let's see, lots of good suggestions, very easy to adopt. Okay, let's see, apologize. If you covered this, is vinegar safe to use for weed killing around pavers?
Yes, it can be efficacious in some. The acetic acid is one of those 40 minimum risk EPA non-registered ingredients. But the level at which you use it definitely depends. So if you're using an acetic acid like a vinegar, it needs to be a 5% instead of a 1%. And so if you're buying cleaning vinegar versus pickling vinegar, it can have an effect. But just also recognize it may not always work on every weed. One thing you can do to kind of break up the outer coating on that weed is to kind of step on it and break up that cell wall, that waxy coating, and then apply acetic acid vinegar, and you may have a much better response rate to that.
And it'll get your aggressions out on the weeds.
Stop the dandelions and then spray them with vinegar.
There you go. There you go. Okay. Are the masks we used for COVID, because we all have tons of those left over, useful as a PPE?
Yes. I use them. I still fives I got from work. Those are great for any sort of particulate product. If you're dealing with something that's a spray, you're going to want to throw that mask away after because you don't want to continue to use that and breathe in that spray. But those masks are great. Even the little blue ones, the thin ones, those are great for any sort of particulate pesticide, any sort of weed and feed or like granular type spray.
Okay, fantastic. And then someone said, can we watch this again? Yes, I record. So this will be at our Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and then just type in Metro Master Gardener in there, it should pop up as a channel and you can subscribe to that. And so this will probably show up early next week, maybe tomorrow if I'm good, because we're at the home show. So things are a little crazy here. Sorry if anybody was watching my video. There's a lot going on behind me, and you probably hear the drills and stuff. But yes, it will show up there. Just give me a few days to do that, and you can watch this again and get all this wonderful information there. Let's see. Can you share the video of the guy with the DIY apple tree sprayer?
I'll send it. I'll send it to Lisa if I can get it to work again.
Okay, I can post that, and so that everybody can see that if they would like to see that. So does anybody else have any other questions? Anything else that's popped into your mind since you've seen the entire presentation now? No? Going once?
I hope you learned during lunch. Lunch and learn.
Yes. Yeah, hopefully everybody got a chance to eat. I get to go eat now. So
Yeah,
we're good. I don't think we have any more questions. So I think that's basically it. So thanks everybody for tuning in. And if you popped in the middle of it, that's fine. You can always go check out the rest of the video when I post that. And with further ado, thank you so much, Allison. We appreciate you coming and spending your lunch with us. And thank you everybody else for checking out this video. And we have all sorts of other classes available. So please check out our UGA Extension Gwinnett Master Gardener page. Come out to the home show this weekend and see us out here. There's all sorts of good stuff. You can swing by our office. We have some comped tickets, so you don't have to pay. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank y'all.
Bye-bye.